Hello, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. This is Robert Vaughn along with Alex Jewell for another episode of the DeFi Collective. We are the DeFi Collective because we deal with decentralized finance, all aspects of it and everything that has to do with it. Bitcoin, crypto, stable coins, the effect that DeFi has on society, the effect that it has on banks, the effect that it has on your pocket. Today we have a great show. We're going to cover various subjects. One of them is smart contracts, and we'll start off with smart contracts. We're also going to talk about the countries now that accept cryptocurrency as currency. I don't know if you were aware, but El Salvador now accepts Bitcoin just like cash. So, of course, with acceptance will bring stability, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I don't know if I'm sure you've probably heard of smart contracts, but smart contracts technically are programs, computer programs that exist on a blockchain, and they have functionality to achieve certain objectives. And the nice thing about having them on the blockchain is there's no chance of fraud. Nobody can change it. Nobody can hack it, because you can't hack the blockchain, because the blockchain has a record of what happened before, what's happening now, and what happened afterwards. So just to give you an example, there's an example. It's kind of corny, but it kind of maybe helps explain it. If you go to a vending machine and you want a candy bar, and the candy bar costs $2. Okay, if you put $1.96 in, no candy bar is going to come out. You can do it 100 times and no candy bar will come out because you haven't met the conditions of the smart contract, so to speak. However, if you put $3 in, which is $1 more than the candy bar costs, you will get the candy bar, and additionally, you will get $1 and change, because the smart contract calls for one candy bar to be dispensed for $2, and all over $2 gets refunded. And all under $2 doesn't get a candy bar, it just gets the money back. And that's the way smart contracts work. Conditions have to be met, for a smart contract to work properly. And those conditions could be, Alex has Cardano, I have Ethereum. And I want to say, Alex, I want to trade you some Cardano for Ethereum. Okay, the smart contract says, well, X amount of Cardano is worth X amount of Ethereum. I put my Cardano in, you put your Ethereum in, the conditions have been met, and then a swap takes place. And the nice thing about it, it takes place without human intervention. And I don't know if you noticed lately, but a lot of times when things go haywire is when people get involved. When you get banks involved and attorneys involved, then financial transactions tend to get a little more complicated. So in that sense, smart contracts can receive, store, and dispense funds without the intervention of a human being. If it's Sunday morning and, I got a great deal on a house, but they want Bitcoin, and all I got is Cardano, well, I can go into a smart contract and exchange that currency. So smart contracts are computer programs, so they operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Unlike banks, they don't shut down. If I need a loan, I can get a loan anytime I want. If I want to stake some of my money and get a loan, I can do that. It removes the human factor, and that's usually when a lot of problems come in, because humans only get involved for one reason, usually in financial transactions. It's not, for charity, it's for making money. How can I insert myself in this transaction and make money? And we talked before about this in reference to the record business, how Nicki Minaj has a label deal with Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne has a record deal with label deal with God, what is his name? Anyway, owns a record company, and then he has a deal with Warner Music Group. So you got like 4 people that have inserted themselves in here, so he'll get 60%. He'll give Lil Wayne 40, and then he'll give Nicki Minaj 20. And then if she has someone signed to her label, maybe they get 8 or 9%. So everybody that inserts themselves does that to make money. And the thing that decentralized finance does, it takes the middleman out of the picture, because, that's what a smart contract is. Alex, you want to talk a little bit about smart contracts and maybe expound upon it and talk about some more of the practical uses and the ones that are in use today that people may not even be aware they're using?
Yeah. So smart contracts are just that code. They're sort of like the code layer that has the logic around how things are exchanged. And so your vending machine example is actually a fun one because, imagine that vending machine scenario where like, okay, well, maybe I can hack an individual vending machine to make sure that my $2.67 does work for a $3 item. But let's say in order for me to do that on the blockchain let's say there's a blockchain vending machine network, I would have to hack simultaneously all 2 million vending machines and all of the locations that they're at the same time for that one transaction to verify it and make that change, right? And so that's sort of where blockchain comes in, because a smart contract by itself is that digital automation of contracts, right? Our little agreements throughout our day-to-day, or the big agreements that we make for our lives that we probably think of as contracts now, for your house or for your car, for your marriage, right? Like these things that are these contracts that like kind of, when we think of the word contract, those are the things we think of, right? But when you think about like getting a ride share, grabbing an Uber or having an exchange for food with a DoorDash driver, or, all the little things, making copies at Office Max, or like whatever little thing you do, all of those are agreements that you have in that situation of like, I'm going to give a certain amount of money. There's logic in the middle that determines what I get back and how much I gave. And all of that right now, we do very manually, right? Or we allow a centralized entity in the middle, like Uber, to write all of that logic for us and handle all of that in a black box. But the reality is that a lot of the things that we do are very peer-to-peer. They're very A to B, right? That's a person or an entity to another person or another entity. And if we can simplify that and streamline how those relationships are formed without the expense of a bunch of middlemen in the middle, then we've done a great job, right? And so one great example of smart contracts in practice right now are with NFTs. So let's say artists are putting up pieces of art, and then let's say they want a commission on that art. So like every time that art gets sold after they've sold it once, they still get 10% or 5% or 20% or whatever their commission is. The smart contract is the one that's determining like, oh, this art got sold again, the creator gets this amount. The art got sold again for this price, the creator gets this amount, right?
And where to send the money and what
address it goes to, right? And those are like immutable values. They're not changeable values. You can't change that because it's part of the contract that allows that art to even exist and those transactions to even occur. And so the artist will always get paid as a result of each sale, right? Now, where we see this happening silently in places you might not even realize are, banks. Like, for example, Bank of America joined the Paxos network so that they could have same-day trade settlements. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's 2021 and banks are like, wait, we can do things same day? I mean, they're like mind blown. They're like, we can settle trades on the same day that the trade took place. I mean, because these things are immediate, right? You can have immediate settlement. They even have like a special, it's like T+0. So it's a trade plus zero. They even have this special like moniker for it of like, it's been 0 days since we traded and it worked, and so behind the scenes, banks are taking on these blockchain solutions to allow for their own settlements and their own liquidity and their own agreements between each other. how to move assets around, because a lot of these banks are working together on different things or moving assets. Maybe there's somebody who's banking with two institutions and they have to move assets behind the scenes. Before, these things were actually pretty cumbersome. They took a lot of manual people in the middle who are pretty expensive to the banking industry. A lot of like third-party companies or things that handled this settlement, handled the trust aspect of it, handled the anti-fraud, handled the know your customer, handled, all of these things that banking institutions have to worry about. All of these things are settled by smart contracts, and they're done so immediately and fluidly. So these are other areas that may not affect us yet, but are happening because they make our world more efficient.
Now, I know this has happened. I've never experienced it, but I've heard a story or two. If you ever wire some money and something goes wrong, well, you better get ready to bring a lunch, an overnight bag, because it's going to be a while. Now, usually it'll get straightened out. It's usually, and 9 times out of 10, it's human error.
Yep.
Somebody entered something wrong, entered the wrong decimal point. It's usually, like I said, it's never happened to me, and it's very rare, but it does happen. But when something like that happens, it could be a financial transaction that's very time sensitive. It doesn't happen. Well, smart contracts, that's all eliminated, because here again, you're taking a human factor out, and there's no middleman or middlewoman or middle person to screw anything up.
Yeah, there's a couple suing Bank of America right now because I think I read it a few weeks ago. Bank of America is being sued over $35,000 that got deposited into the wrong account, and whether it was definitely human error at some point, but to the bank, it doesn't really matter, right? Money got moved, fees were paid, and what is it, what it doesn't really affect their bottom line if it's in the wrong account. And so these are real issues that happen, and they would never happen.
They would never happen. Yeah. And they have some weird rules. I can remember one time I put this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I deposited a check in the ATM. And the rule at the time was a check over a certain amount couldn't be deposited.
They still have those caps. Yeah.
How long do you think it took me to get that straightened out?
I don't even want. It
took me almost a month to get that straightened out.
Yeah.
But we can't go on the ATM. That's a third party that does that. And, it'll have to clear and then it'll have to come back. It took me a month to get that straightened out.
Yep.
But, they did fix the problem. It was a system error and it was fixed. But, with a smart contract, that never would have happened.
Right.
And luckily I wasn't in a position where, I had to pay my bills or anything like that. So it just was mind boggling that it took so long,
Right.
And now if I had been involved in a business and I had a time sensitive financial transaction to consummate, that could have been a real problem.
Yeah.
And I probably still would have been in court with them today, So smart contracts, they call them smart contracts because they're smarter than human beings because they don't make human error. Is that a good way? That's not why they call them smart contracts, probably.
Yes, the term smart contracts actually came about probably earlier than cryptocurrency, but because it's probably some academic, Szabo maybe, some academic who's writing a lot about programming theory. He wanted to call it smart simply because it automates the things that a paper contract does, right? So like my paper contract might say something should happen, but then imagine the bureaucracy of actually arguing that something didn't happen or going through all that process. And do you have the evidence? Is there proof that this didn't happen? Then you're sitting in court for, months because a part of a paper contract was not upheld, right? And so his idea of smart contracts was with the onset of programming and computer science. Well, now we have things to automate agreements, right? And automate the movement of funds, especially. So I think that's where it came from. And then obviously it was very applicable then to blockchain, because then blockchain provided the security element, the anti-fraud, the provided the decentralization of that concept.
Right, right. Because I know, in the entertainment business, contracts. When you record a song, you got an 8-page contract with the producer. Then you got, you may have a manager, you have a contract with the manager. You got the publisher who publishes the music. You got a contract, and it really gets to be mind-boggling.
Yep.
Amount of contract. Everybody that does business has a contract. Well, smart contracts could really kind of eliminate a lot of that.
Yeah.
Alex made the song. He gets 8 cents every time it plays. And he doesn't need a manager because the money gets transferred through the blockchain directly to his address. And if you download the song, 8 cents comes out of your wallet and goes to Alex's wallet. And this happens instantaneously.
Yeah.
So that I could see a lot of practical applications.
Right.
There are a lot of people, a lot of middlemen are going to like because they won't be able to make money off everybody anymore. A lot of the banks are not going to like it. And I think that's why we see a lot of pushback on cryptocurrency with banks.
I think it's why we see a lot of confusion too, because
right.
at the end of the day, banks are just institutions full of a bunch of people, right? Mm-hmm. And they're not like always on the same page in terms of like what to do or how it benefits them or what their strategy should be. And honestly, and until recently, it didn't matter. They kind of had their thing. It was working really well. And with the onset of a more digital world, and then now with an onset of like alternative ways of exchanging value and thinking about value, well, obviously banks have to scramble now, right? Because they have to rethink, what is our model? How do we use this to our own advantage internally? And what do we do about the fact that this does somewhat compete with our service offering? And how do we adapt to that, right?
Yeah, they want to figure how they can insert themselves, in the transaction to make some money.
Right.
Because they're basically middlemen. They get money from the Fed and they loan it out, and nothing really changes hands until you pay you make an interest payment.
Yep.
That's why if you ever have a pretty good size loan with a bank, you say, I just want to make an interest payment. Okay, that's fine. Because that's the only way that's when real money gets created, is when you make an interest payment.
And credit cards. I mean, things like, we've talked about credit cards and loans and stuff before. Mm-hmm. And obviously adding an algorithmic edge to that made banks a ton of money, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because then they could pinpoint who's the most vulnerable. Well, they'll never be able to pay this off, but they'll always keep paying us, right?
Yeah, and if they pay us for 5 years, it's kind of like in the car business. People say, well, wow, you make more money on high-end cars, which typically is true, but not always. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I was at a meeting one time with a bunch of car dealers that talked about the low-end cars, where they would buy these cars for $3,000 at the auction. They put $2,000 into the car, so they'd have $5,000 into the car, and they could sell the car 3 times. I'm like, I don't get this. What do you mean sell it 3 times? Well, you could sell it to someone. You'd have them put $3,000 down, so you really get back what you put out for the car, and then every payment they make is pure profit. And, if they have a 490 credit score, eventually they're going to default. And then you just go repo the car, and then you sell it to somebody else. And you can do that an average of 3.4 times before the car, so I mean, it's pretty crazy, man. The way, people make money off of, they insert themselves into the transaction to make money. Like, why should I have to go to a car dealer to buy a Ford truck? Why can't I just transfer my money to Ford and they send me the truck and there's no middleman, and I think, and there's no financing with the bank, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think smart contracts, the reason I think you get so much pushback now against cryptocurrency and decentralized finance is because they're trying to figure it out. This is a whole new economic system.
Yeah.
That banks,
that's transparent, that's owned by the people, right?
That's right.
And really these forces we're describing are the deterioration of society at the expense of, it's the predatory nature of late stage capitalism, where
Mhm.
if all that matters to you and your investors and your stakeholders is the bottom line,
Mhm.
and you can, especially with technology, develop that formula of like, I can sell this car 3.4 times, right? That idea of like preying on people who are particularly more vulnerable,
Yeah, yeah, who are the most
from
vulnerable.
them. I
Yeah.
mean, that is inherently a problematic. I mean, that's a very troubling thing, right? But that's so prevalent in terms of how people make so much money, is because they have that down to a science of like, how can we continue preying on people to make more money from them, right? And it's gone beyond the social driven capitalism of like allowing people, we can all start a small business and we can all succeed. No, I mean, not when you have systems like that in place where people are profiting off of you not being able to afford your own car. I mean, like
Yeah.
this is now we have an inherent problem. And that's why things like smart contracts bring transparency to the system. And it,
Mhm.
like we've talked about before, it reverses that flow of ownership of like,
Right, right,
now
right.
I'm owning my own agreements,
Mhm.
and I have full transparency over the logic of those agreements.
Mhm.
And it's not owned by people in the middle who profit off of being in the middle.
Right. And see this, we talked about the you know, we used to be on a gold standard. Now we're kind of like on a data standard and on the derivative standard. And, I mean, you take certain companies are not really worth what their stock says they're worth, but people speculate because they feel that it might be worth that much in the future. Take Tesla, for example. Have they ever made money?
No, I mean, definitely not a
And their stock is worth how many billions? 40 billion, it's 60 billion. I mean, it's ridiculous,
yeah.
But people will speculate on that, and kind of make the company worth something that it's really not. And every once in a while, you have a short squeeze, like you have with GameStop, where a lot of people are betting the stock is going to go back down, and then a lot of people bet it's going to go higher.
Yeah.
And the hedge funds
AMC
will
now.
get on short, they lose money.
Yeah.
And when they lose money, then Robinhood stops trading on the stock. you know, so it's kind of a crazy system. And I think, what makes money valuable. Let's talk a little bit about what makes a dollar, what makes things valuable. What makes a dollar have value?
Yeah. Um, well, what used to make a dollar valuable
Mhm.
was the gold standard, right? It was like,
Mhm.
we've got, as a country, as something backing this dollar, we have a variety, for a while it was just gold, but then there was like bonds and things too, that they
Mhm.
said we have these valuable things that have tangible, they have like utility or whatever the case may be. And that's what backs our money, right? That's why we're valuable as a country. That's why the US dollar is useful in trade. It's why you can exchange it for something else that's valuable to you, is because that dollar, that $1 is backed by something equivalent in value to how much you're spending that $1 on, right?
Right. Okay.
And so, the problem is that we started needing more dollars. And just the process of having enough to back it up was getting kind of a little
Mhm.
uncomfortable and cumbersome, I guess. So we decided to make the dollar worth what we said it was worth, right? What basically what we decided it was worth.
Okay.
Hope and a prayer that it's the standard currency for trade, that the US name, the brand of the US has like some sort of brilliance to it that people will trust and want to keep using,
Mhm.
and that other countries will want to keep like salivating over how cool we are, and the dollar will keep having value, right? Magically. And we'll just keep, and we'll keep printing off this inflationary nothingness paper that's just backed by our name, right? And so it's kind of ironic when a lot of people's initial critique, without knowing what it is, their initial critique of something like Bitcoin is that, well, how is it's not backed by anything, right? And the fact is, it's actually backed by a lot more than the dollar, because it's backed by scarcity, and it's backed by a system in place like halving, where it actually has.
Explain to people that Bitcoin is
Yeah.
there's only a limited quantity of Bitcoin.
Right.
So the more demand you have drives the price up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because there's only 21 million tokens, and we still have another 100 years before those are even all in circulation. There's only so much of it. And so the more that people agree to use it as a storage of value, because it has the tokenomics, it has the economics that protect it from being inflationary like a dollar. It's deflationary. In other words, it's a hedge against inflationary currencies that don't have anything backing them. And it's actually more of the things that used to back them. In fact, that's why a lot of people call Bitcoin digital gold, is because like gold, there's only so much of it. It has real utility in terms of how it exchanges ideas and exchanges value. And it maintains its value. In fact, it increases in value the more that we use it and recognize these bonuses. Not to mention that the underlying technology of blockchain itself is inherently not hackable. It doesn't need the middlemen. All of those things that make it useful in terms of all of our lives utilities, all of our exchanges and businesses and daily lives. So, it has all of those useful components, and it's designed to be deflationary. So at the end of the day, what makes something valuable is that will kind of always change with culture, but the economics of how it maintains that value and how we determine that value, those have to remain really strong. The underlying economic principles of how we determine that are really important to understand, I think. And it can get a little muddy, because there's always going to be different people who you can watch on YouTube who will talk about like what, that they think they have economics degrees. But it's important to understand that things like data, like we've talked about a lot, things like data are now another hedge. They're another storage of value because of what they mean for society, right? How do we understand ourselves enough to build better products for ourselves and build a better society? We do it with data, right? And that's why companies find so much value in data, is because for them, understanding us for the sake of taking advantage of us, perhaps, or being predatory, or even helping us, it makes them as a company more valuable. But imagine if we took ownership over that data again, and then we were able to be the sellers of that data ourselves, and the owners and the deciders of where our data was used and what was used for. Well, now we're dealing with
if we chose to do that.
Right, exactly. We're dealing with a whole new idea of ownership, and we're dealing with a whole new idea of value and currency.
Right. Bitcoin, it's funny because whenever somebody speaks of Bitcoin, it says, well, Bitcoin was at 36,000 today. They always define it in terms of
the thing that's going to replace,
of the dollar, relationship to the dollar. If a dollar is inflationary, there may come a point in time where Bitcoin is defined by something other than a dollar. And I think there may come a time where Bitcoin is defined by, well, you can buy a new truck with 0.726 Bitcoin, rather than a Bitcoin is worth $36,000.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Or Satoshis. Because one Bitcoin's not actually a real thing. It's actually 100 million Satoshis. The reason this higher level of organization, the Bitcoin, was determined is because it was worth so few US dollars to begin with that they had to. So, but now we're getting to the point where like a single Bitcoin is worth so much US dollars. that it might be better at some point to think about it in terms of Satoshi. So like, let's say I go, to get bread and it's 10 Satoshis or 100 Satoshis, right? Or something along those lines. So,
Right.
really.
Which it could very well happen in a country like El Salvador
Yeah.
that now accepts Bitcoin like cash.
100%.
They may
Countries
say,
that don't have stable currencies.
yeah, they say, well, we don't want dollars, man. We prefer to have Bitcoin. So go buy some DAI and convert it into Bitcoin and come back.
Right.
And every time something like that happens, I mean, there's so many countries now that accept cryptocurrency. It's like ridiculous.
Right.
Ethiopia now has made Cardano a cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
The national currency of the country.
Yeah.
El Salvador just this week is the first country that accepts Bitcoin just like cash. Brazil accepts Bitcoin, and there are tons of other countries that accept cryptocurrency.
All these leaders were at the Bitcoin conference last weekend too. They were there and
flew
to Miami. Probably saw things they can never forget. And but they were there. I mean, politicians and leaders around the world, banking executives. This was unlike any, Bitcoin conference that used to just be a bunch of nerds, thinking they're really cool in Miami. And now it's, now it's serious because now this stuff is changing the very fabric of society.
Right. And see, I think what it's going to change is, the capitalism is going through another shakeup. Like we talked about, all these economic systems they last for about 300 to 400 years, and then they go away, they get transformed in some way. Slavery was an economic system. It got transformed by the minimum wage now, so it's pretty much about the same, where they say slave wages,
Right.
So capitalism, I think, is being transformed because the dollar is the United States currency. Now, there could come a time where China and Africa or, the Middle East could say, well, we don't want dollars anymore.
Right.
We're going to put our money into Bitcoin. France is really probably the strongest Western proponent of this economic system. Perhaps, there comes a time when people say, well, we think this is an unfair advantage for the United States in terms of how many weapons they can buy.
Yep.
So we're going to keep our currency in Bitcoin from now on, and we don't want dollars. So what do you foresee? And I mean, this is not so far-fetched.
No.
This is not so far. It's kind of like happening already.
Right.
So you've got to buy real estate, I guess. Get some farmland just in case there is a hedge. But how do you see this kind of playing out?
Well, I mean, you see a lot of the banks forming their own cryptocurrencies. I see a lot of countries forming their own, centralized blockchain-based currency, digital currencies. And what will probably happen is that a lot of those countries realizing that they actually can't stop crypto from happening.
India tries every year.
China tries constantly. And even in a place like China, unless they flip the breaker and turn off the whole network, which they're not going to do.
They're making too much money.
They've either got to work with it or, they've got to figure out some way to incentivize people away from the decentralized currencies. They have to figure out some way to say, look at our shiny cryptocurrency. If you use our centralized digital currency that's using blockchain, maybe even, and if you use ours, here's your highest interest rates. Here's your, tax breaks. Here's less fees. Here's like a quicker way to pay your bail or pay your ticket or pay, whatever other fees and taxes and things. And so they're going to figure out ways of like incentivizing the use of their own digital currencies in lieu of the other ones, while they probably even try to back those with the decentralized stuff. So imagine a country stockpiling as much Bitcoin as it can, and then incentivizing its residents to use Bitcoin to give it to them or use their own centralized digital currencies Well, they back it with all of the Bitcoin, right? And,
Right.
and so we're going to have to be really conscious and aware of like what is centralized and what isn't. And what that means in terms of these benefits that we talk about, right? If the benefits of decentralization are the better security, their true ownership, the immediate transactability, the transparency. If all of these things are lost with centralization of a digital currency, then the only people benefiting again from this technology, from something like blockchain, is a centralized entity that's using it for their currency, and not the rest of us who are now having to use it through them.
Because governments will try to corner the market on Bitcoin because it's scarce.
Right.
And billionaires will try to corner the market on Bitcoin because it's scarce.
Another gold rush, right?
Yeah, suppose the government said, I'll tell you what, you pay your taxes in Bitcoin and you get 30% off.
Right.
And they just
you don't pay capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Pay your other taxes, right? Like whatever
Yeah.
incentives they can come up with. Yeah.
So they hoard all the Bitcoin, but I see kind of counteracting that the fact that there's so many different cryptocurrencies, and I think that might be the antidote for that.
Yeah.
Bitcoin,
Contextual currency.
yeah. Bitcoin may not be the only game in town. If you ask most people now, Ethereum is preferable to Bitcoin in terms of, a place to store your money, but Bitcoin is a place to store your money. Ethereum is a network that smart contracts can function on.
Right. Storage of wealth versus utility, right?
Yeah, versus utility, right. So I see there is going to have to be some type of regulation. I don't know if regulation is good or it's bad. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, some regulation is necessary, right? The fact is that if we don't have any regulation, then we do have situations where scams become prevalent and we can't tell the difference, where people can outright lie, right? Regulation in any market is still necessary. The question that we have in a decentralized market is, how is that regulation? How does it work? Right. And governance is another benefit of cryptocurrency, right? If the regulation is baked into the system in a decentralized way with DAOs or something, then we have smart contracts handling our regulation, not a few people in Washington who don't actually understand what they're regulating. Right. Or they have some other agenda in terms of what they're regulating and how they benefit from it. So this is the inherent difference. Regulation itself is not the problem. We obviously need some regulation. We need enough regulation to protect people, and not so much that we don't, stifle actual development, stifle use, right? Or stifle access. So, ultimately, I'm a proponent for decentralization of even the governance aspect. But in the meantime, realistically, we also have to prepare ourselves for the fact that governments are going to need to regulate this stuff in order for all of the other institutions to be comfortable enough with it, and in order for it to be realistic for us to keep using it. So we can just hope that regulation is as effective as we can hope for in the meantime.
Yeah, well, there's always been some type of barter system, and if they impact Bitcoin in a way that it doesn't reverse the flow of ownership like it should,
right,
I think people will go to something else.
Yep.
I think the thing about cryptocurrencies and a blockchain, I mean, it's like opens the floodgates for smart contracts that create all type of currencies.
Yeah.
That are, based on utility, some sort of utility, or like Bitcoin are valuable because they're scarce and there's so many of them.
Yeah. I mean, how do you regulate all digital exchanges of value? I mean, you can't, or all non-fiat currency exchanges. You can't. I mean, you're going to tell kids they can't trade gel pens or something. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to tell people in video games that they can't trade some sword for some shield, right? The idea is that, like, how do you determine what is regulated and what isn't by your regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is inherent. I mean, it's a really important question, actually.
It
It goes back to our original question of like what makes something valuable or what makes it a currency. And the fact is that we deal in different currencies in our lives all the time.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
definitely a challenge on
The,
the regulation front.
yeah. A couple of interesting facts. 1/3 of the world adults are unbanked. They do not have banking accounts. 63 million US citizens have no banking accounts. They use money orders to pay their bills. If they need to borrow money, they maybe go to a check cashing place. But 63 million citizens have no bank accounts. A lot of African, not a lot, but a few African countries now, your cell phone and your cryptocurrency is how you bank.
Right.
And not just there, but in many other parts of the world. So I see banks as kind of like banks have to really kind of rethink themselves and kind of reform, because so many people have been left out of the banking community because they say, well, this guy that makes the guy that works for me that I pay $8 an hour is not worth having as a customer.
Yeah.
Because he's going to cost me more money than I can make off of it.
Right.
So a lot of those people are, are unbanked,
Yeah.
And a lot of banking institutions better understand that blockchain can solve a lot of their problems.
Yep.
And maybe ensure their continued existence as banking institutions.
Right.
Some of the problems that blockchain could solve is, if you want to transfer money, say I want to, buy something from you and you're in another country and I want to transfer money and, like you say, a wire transfer. I never understood how a freaking wire transfer can take hours or even a day. I mean, it's on a wire, man. It's the speed of electricity. What is the problem? The problem is there have to be so many checks and balances to make sure nobody steals the money.
Right.
And that's why it takes so long.
Yeah.
Where with, smart contracts, that could happen, instantaneously.
Yep.
So I see banks, if they're smart, the banking institutions that'll be around in 20 or 30 years are the ones who will take advantage of decentralized finance and incorporate it into their banking system. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the ones that do recognize the importance that they get on board with it are definitely more inclined to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Because realistically, what a lot of banks make money on too are things like trading and things like that. And I don't think that stocks are going to disappear, or that like the markets are going to disappear, other markets, other commodities markets, and obviously these are all real things that wealthier people can still invest in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they'll most likely do it through banking institutions. And so if these institutions recognize ways that blockchain can help them in terms of being custodians of those processes, right? Of like being the brokerage or whatever the case may be, the trading firm, taking on those jobs, providing liquidity, maybe providing like loans, still things like that. There's still every aspect of those services that blockchain would solve for them and make their services more efficient and cheaper for them to carry out, more accessible, more automated. The ability to settle things immediate settlement, having over collateralization with crypto is huge. And then also having real liquidity, right? Which is actual liquidity has been a major issue in modern day banking, right? Of actually having liquidity to carry things out. Mm-hmm. It's a constant nightmare for them. So
go try and draw 50 or 60 grand out of the bank in cash. You know what they'll tell you? We don't have that much.
Right. Yeah.
You'll have to go to the main branch, or you'll have to come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
We don't have that much. And I'm
Right.
like, do you not have that much, or do you not want to give me that much? You know, uh, so I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of both, but usually they don't keep a lot of cash on hand
No, because
because
everything's working in terms of digital ideas of money anyway. They're not, they're not like stockpiling a bunch of stuff. A lot of their vaults are pretty empty. You walk into a bank vault right now and it's like, somebody's grandmother's necklace and like,
yeah, I would say help
you
yourself.
know,
Help yourself.
maybe
It's
like
a
a few
stick up. Help
dollars.
yourself. Yeah, help
Yeah.
yourself to a vault. I'll be back. I'm
It's
going to lunch.
dusty.
Yeah. And yeah, so especially with fractional lending where they only have to keep, if you put $100 in a bank, they only have to keep $10 in the bank and they can loan out 90, which creates actual money for them in terms of interest that's paid. So if you came back in and said, hey, I want my $100, I'm going to take it all out, they wouldn't have the money.
Right.
They'd have to go to the Fed and sell some bonds or do something to get some money, borrow money from the Feds, what they'd have to do. Yeah. So I think banks, banking institutions, I think what's going to be very interesting is how the stock market is affected by DeFi. For instance, Alex has a company and the company makes 100 grand a year. And we say the company's worth what, 10 times earnings. So it's worth $1 million. So we'll say we're going to sell half of that company for $500,000 because that's what it's worth. Well, see, in the stock market, that $500,000 could be 500 million.
Right.
Because there's no smart contract to determine that this company should be selling for 10 times earnings, or it should be selling if if the company is worth $1 million and you pay $500,000, you should own half the company.
Your
Now,
PE ratio is 743. And
like some car dealer I know, some car guy I know. That hasn't even made a dime, but that's another show. But I think at some point, I don't know, the stock market is going to have to come to terms, because there'll be it's going to take a lot of the gambling out of the system.
Yeah.
If you had a company and you say, okay, this is my company, and it's on a blockchain. If you want to own 5% of it, this is what it costs. And I'm going to make 6% a year. So this is what I'm going to pay you.
Yeah.
And then, if I make X amount of dollars, I'll still pay you 6% of what I made.
Right.
And then there's a smart contract for that. And then you don't get somebody coming along saying, oh God, Alex is such a great guy. His company's going to be worth $80 billion. And all of a sudden the price of stock goes up.
Yeah.
But I think what drives the price of stock up are speculators.
Exactly.
People going long, people going short, it drives it up or down. And it really has no bearing on what the company is actually really worth.
It's speculation over liquidity, right? A lot of people call crypto speculative, but the only reason they call a lot of crypto speculative is because they're thinking about it in terms of markets that people trade crypto on in US dollars.
Right.
So, they're still thinking about it within the speculative system we currently have that traders use instead of the really, really liquid system that DeFi actually uses, right? If you have a liquidity pool and you've got a certain number of Binance Smart tokens against a certain number of Binance stable tokens, and that's it. There's no speculation there, right? Like you're not like, well, I'm going to say that liquidity pool is worth so much and I'm going to get back a certain amount because I predicted so, you know what I mean? Like it's now when you do get into some like automatic market making, things like we've talked about before, like Uniswap V3, where you pick a point on the curve, that's predictive, right? You're saying this price is not going to fluctuate from where I think it's going to.
It's going to fluctuate within these narrow boundaries.
Right. But
Okay.
the reason that's still extremely liquid is because you're still dealing with a liquidity pool that has all of the funds to back up the mathematical concepts of why you're going to earn more on that, right? There's actual math, there's tangible utility to what you're doing. And it's not just like some PE ratio that's blown out of proportion because, oh, 10 years from now, we're going to send you in a Hyperloop. Like there's not some like idea of what makes it valuable. It's valuable because of real liquidity. And that's an extremely powerful and necessary thing that we need to put back in our financial system.
Right. And I think it's really going to cause a lot of turmoil. I think more so in the stock market than the bond market, because I think bonds, you'll probably see people invest in bonds are starting, I think, already to go to Bitcoin.
Yep.
I mean, if you just, if you're not trying to make money, but you just want to preserve what you have and live off the interest.
Yeah.
If you got $400 million, I don't see why you couldn't just live off the interest.
Yeah.
You could
put $1 million
it.
or $2 million in a liquidity pool. You're 9 or 10, 12K a day or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Compare that to traditional
Mhm.
ways of investing that, looking at like 6 cents a day, 7 cents, like you're like,
yeah,
you can't even feed somebody in a third world country for the interest you're earning on your millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah. So I think, you're going to see a lot of, and I think the reason it hasn't happened already is because most of your more conservative old line investors, they're very conservative and they're not likely to change. And also they don't understand
right
decentralized finance.
Yeah.
I mean, half of them don't even understand the internet. So,
Right.
asking them to make a decision about decentralized finance is really a stretch.
Yeah. They still got 4 phones in front of them and they're just like,
yeah. And it's amazing. That used to amaze me that you meet some people and they have a ton of money, but they really are like really old school. And what they did has always worked for them. So that's why they never changed.
Right.
But what do you think is going to kind of force a change here? Will it be a serious crash in the stock market or will it be because most people, when it crashes, they say, oh, that's a buying signal. And
right.
just getting rid of all my bonds and real estate and we're going to buy stock.
I think we're definitely going to see some form of hyperinflation, right?
Mhm.
And when inflation eclipses how much you're earning in interest,
Mhm.
which for most people using traditional systems, it already should be, right? So if inflation,
it already is probably.
if inflation this year is 2.5 to 10%, which is a pretty big range, but that's essentially the range we're looking at.
Mhm.
If inflation for next year is 2.5 to 10%, and you're earning at most 3% on 6% best case scenario, but in a hyperinflation market, you're not going to. Like, then now you have the potential for the inflation to eclipse even the interest you're earning. In other words, you're losing money letting it sit in something.
You're going
right?
backwards.
So,
You're going backwards.
Even for the wealthy class to look at those numbers and say, well, I had a friend tell me he was making 12% or 20% on interest on something. What is he doing? Right. And so, I think we are seeing that adoption. We're seeing some of those older, more conservative folks start listening to like, what is this? And, like I said, there was a ton of them at the Bitcoin conference last weekend, open to hearing people talk about what the hell this thing is. And so I think we're going to see it the more that our traditional system breaks, even for the people at the top. Right. Like you said, they haven't really been open because things have always worked for them. But when
why change? Why change? Yeah.
When things stop working as well, or they really see the value in what's happening through enough osmosis, even, then maybe we'll see them move over.
Yeah. Because change always starts usually from the bottom. From social changes from the people,
right?
Who get left behind or get a raw deal.
Exactly.
The people at the top, they never want to change, because I mean, you know, if you're looking at becoming a trillionaire, you know, in the next 10 years, I mean, why would you want to change?
Right.
You
Why
know,
would you want a more accessible system? You're
yeah,
not,
why would
you
you
don't
want,
become a
yeah,
trillionaire with more access for others.
yeah, yeah. And so I've always wondered, you know, like, you know, in the long term, you know, with capitalism, as wealth gets more and more concentrated, you know, I see decentralized finance as maybe something that could keep this from really getting totally out of hand,
Yeah.
where you have three people that own everything and everybody else owns nothing, you know.
Right.
So I don't know. I think decentralized finance can have a positive societal impact,
Yeah.
not just in terms of reversing the flow of ownership, but also in terms of keeping people educated about their money,
Yep.
you know, because you know, the best customer to have is one that doesn't know anything about what you're doing with
Yeah.
his money, you know. And I think, you know, people will keep people educated, and I think in turn, I think you're going to see money flow out of the stock market before too long, you know.
Or
Uh,
you'll see more companies putting crypto onto the books, which they're doing,
mhm,
and hopefully you'll see a structural change to how we trade. Even
mhm,
right, you'll see a structural change to how people invest.
mhm,
You'll see a lot more like grassroots. You'll see a lot more fractional ownership and fractional investing. And even apps like Robinhood have definitely been problematic. There's definitely been issues, but Robinhood, even in just allowing the ability to fractionally invest in something,
mhm.
opened up the floodgates in terms of
That
obviously
is it.
anybody and their
Right,
mom now has
right.
$10 in this and $10 in that, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so crypto brings an actual system to how that could work.
Mhm,
And so I think we'll see more of that. So I think investing in companies will actually get expanded. It'll get blown open,
mhm,
because you won't just have the same 10 people that throw money at the wall until one sticks, and then now they're a billionaire, and then they go start a online book company, and now they're buying $500 million yachts, and
mhm.
like you
Yeah,
won't see that same trajectory for one person. You'll see a lot better distribution of wealth for millions of people,
right.
to be able to have a higher quality of life because they were able to allow their money to work for them and have true ownership over the results.
Yeah. And I think in any society, the conflict and wars throughout history has always been about the haves and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the wars in the last 100 years have been pretty much about oil.
Yep.
That's been like the gold. You know, it's been liquid gold. You know, we talk about the gold standard. How about the oil standard? You
Yeah.
know, so every war, a lot of them were lost because there was no access to oil. You know, the United States didn't attack Guam because they wanted to grow fruit over there. They attacked Guam and Southeast Asia because that's where Germany was getting the high octane fuel. They were getting the oil for the high octane fuel to operate the bombers, you know.
Yeah. And we're still in Guam.
Yeah, yeah, it was still in Guam. Yeah. And if they, you know, Vietnam, people say, oh, Vietnam, we're gonna, you know, fight communism. No, you're gonna fight the oil going to
the Red
places.
Scare was
Yeah,
really
the Red
just
Scare. Yeah,
a
yeah.
scramble,
You
a
want to stop
scramble
the
for
oil.
black
Yeah,
black gold.
yeah. Scramble for black gold. Yeah, and it's funny how in history books, I think a few years when I look back upon this period, you know, say, well, you know, we thought we were off the gold standard. We really were like on the oil standard.
Yeah.
You know, and Saudi Arabia, I think, has kind of realized this because they're trying to get into crypto and trying to do
Mm-hmm.
something because oil runs out, you know,
Right.
and so you got to plan for a time when it does, you know. So yeah.
Right.
Well, these are interesting issues, and economic systems are by their very nature political systems. You know, and when I remember when I took economics classes, I said, "This who needs to know this crap, man? I'm not going to be a banker, you know." But you know, economic systems determine your political systems. You know, and they are by the very nature political systems. So I think um, decentralized finance, DeFi, cryptocurrency it's going to be sort of a little shakeup in this political system too.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I think education of the masses of people is going to be one of the most important things that has to happen so people actually understand it.
Right.
Not like the Fed. You ask somebody about the Fed and how money gets transferred, where are your central banks located? Is that part of the government? And they don't really have a clue. So they don't understand.
Right.
But I think it's different this time because of the internet. People are able to access information.
Yeah.
Before, 75 years ago, the way you got to be a banker was your dad was a banker. That's pretty much was it,
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would just say, I thank you for watching the show. We appreciate your time, and ours is about up. But again, you can reach us on the DeFi Collective at gmail.com. And we're on YouTube, Let's Talk Radio, the DeFi Collective. So we'd love to hear from you and sort of hear your thoughts. And don't forget to, follow us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. We have a number of very informative shows that we've done on various subjects related to decentralized finance. So until next week, Alex, you have anything to say in closing?
No, I think we definitely got into some meat in this one.
Yeah. And if you ever have any questions, I know sometimes when I'm talking to Alex, I have to have my Google on my phone so I can look up things. So it seems like I know what I'm talking about. But if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the DeFi Collective at gmail.com, and we will certainly get you an answer, because DeFi, decentralized finance, is here to stay. And hopefully we're here to stay too. So with that, I'll say have a great day and a great week.
Have a good one.
Uh-huh.